Should we talk about sex today and do some exercises sexually? You guys know the difference between, let's say, therapy, yoga, and spiritual practice? Can you make that discrimination? Because it's important when we enter something like sexuality, because sexual therapy, sexual yoga, and sexual spiritual practice have nothing to do with each other. And that goes for everything, not just sex. Therapy, yoga, and spiritual practice are independent. And if we have time or we get into it, I'll relate it all to Ken's model, which I love. But I don't want to spend the time doing the theory today. I mostly want to work with you one-on-one and doing practices if we could get to them. So I'll talk about sex in those terms and then see how far we get. But you could apply it to meditation and anything else. Therapy cures, heals dysfunction into function. So these are, again, my opinion. After the 3 hours are up, you could say, fuck that. But let's go for the ride. So anytime you're trying to fix yourself, that's therapy. Anytime you're trying to improve your function, that's therapy. In my words, and the way I'm going to use the words. Anytime you're trying to make your sex better, that's therapy. Anytime you're trying to get beyond your sexual inhibitions, that's therapy. Anytime you're trying to learn how to give your love, even though you're terrified because of an abuse issue, that's therapy. So all of that's very important to learn to love and to grow sexually. Boundary conditions of good therapy is safety, support, gentleness, understanding, respect, honesty. And that's all very important in the therapeutic modality. So if we're doing something and you're with a partner or you notice somebody freezing up, let's say I say, okay, come on up here, would you come on up here, take off your clothes and have sex with Eli before we begin? And you go, then I might, I'll say, would you prefer Moloch? Oh no, she's like, where's Eli? Before I could say that, she was like, okay, well, let's move on. So much for therapy, let's move right on to yoga. If I suggested something like that, and in your case you obviously don't need therapy, but if you had a reaction of like, I've never been able to trust men before, that kind of thing, then what we would do is create a situation of safety, no pressure, find out how you're feeling, address that directly, give you time and space to unfold at your own healing leisure, create the right context, be gentle, all of that. And that's how we help you. There's specific techniques, of course, but that's the circumstance, the environment of therapy. It's very important to understand that because I personally believe that Eastern culture, meditative culture is what a lot of you seem to be doing in ITP, was transplanted from the East to the West and was absorbed into a therapeutic philosophical context. I don't think that's where it came from. I think that's a big mistake, but here we are. So, in other words, yoga and spiritual practice is not therapy. Yoga and spiritual practice has nothing to do with therapy. Yoga and spiritual practice require a totally different environment and context than therapy. Will therapeutic issues come up while you're practicing yoga and spiritual practice? Of course. Should you deal with them? Absolutely. Full spectrum dealing, You need a moment of therapy? Apply your skillful means of therapy. But those are totally different contexts than what, again, these are all my mind forms, than what I would call yoga or spiritual practice. So to make it clear, spiritual practice, yoga, and therapy are approaches to life in the moment. And therapy takes dysfunction, moves it into function. Yoga increases the flow. So you get function from therapy, you get flow from yoga, and you get glow from spiritual practice. Function, flow, glow. If you want a kind of analogy, which people's minds seem to like, you can imagine a kind of stained glass window, and you are the stained glass window. You look at yourself and you notice you're broken. You have pieces broken out of you. You know, like a big stained glass window. There's hunks missing, battered, abused, chipped, wounded, rejected, you know, the whole trip that we all have. So we look at ourselves and we go, fuck. Like, I need to learn to relax. I need to learn to accept the parts of myself I project onto others, and you know, all the psychological skills that are useful. That's like replacing glass, fixing broken glass. Oh, it's broke, you put in a new piece of glass. Yoga is like wiping the dust off the glass. You could be broken as fuck and still do good yoga. Really. I mean, as you'll see, many yogis are. so you could be entirely dysfunctional therapeutically, psychologically, emotionally. You could be a wreck and still be a master yogi. You don't have to be. I mean, the whole integral approach tries to address all that, but nevertheless, they're separate. So yoga is the capacity to allow light, let's say energy, to flow through you as you. It could be hatha yoga, letting energy flow through your body. It could be an emotional yoga, so you actually take emotional asanas, emotional postures, and you do them as a practice so that the flow of energy through your emotions is more flowful, open, unobstructed. It doesn't fix the parts of you that are broken. It just takes the dust off. It makes you more transparent, more translucent. You seem more able to flow with energy at every level. And then spiritual practice, it doesn't involve fixing the glass, nor does it involve making it more transparent to the flow of light. And again, these are just my words. Spiritual practice per se is realizing you are the light. In moments of realizing you are the light, there is very little motive to do much about fixing the glass or dusting it off. Not that you shouldn't. There's just not a lot of inherent motive. You're the light. So in the position of being the light, which all of us are at any moment, we're willing to stop looking through the glass. That light's coming through everyone equally, or fully, let's say. It is everyone. It is everything. So when you're identified with that, you're essentially as moved to fix this, that, him and her, and as you are you. There's no sense of, oh, I got to deal with myself. It's a universal dealing because you are the light, not the glass. So those of you who feel you are broken or less functional than you can be, in those moments, you need therapy. Let's say sexual therapy if we're looking at sex. When you're not feeling particularly stuck in your dysfunction, but you're feeling kind of obstructed in the fullness of your flow, you need yoga. Totally different circumstances. Yoga, the way I'm using the word, is an art. It's an art form. What's the right environment for art? Is it safety, quiet, spaciousness? Possibly. Sometimes it is. But really, I mean, those of you who have done art in your way, and by art it could be musicianship, painting, raising your children as an art, singing. Think of the times you've been most inspired, the radical shifts in your art and so forth. I don't know how much you guys talk in front of each other, but usually most artists find those places at temporary extremes. Raise your hand if you know what I'm talking about. Okay. Okay. So for art, you want to create temporary extremes. And that's true whether you're like an artist painter, like Picasso, chain smoking, abusing women, working, you're keeping it out there, and that's how you do art. Not all the time, but if you know any artists, or you yourself are an artist, you know that whatever, drugs, sex, and rock and roll could be a big part of it. But so is just the emotional drama and tension of life could supply enough for good art. Very different from therapy. So if you want to make sexual art with your lovemaking, you want to go to the extremes. If you want to do therapy, sexual therapy, you want a safe environment. Totally different approaches. Shouldn't be mixed. Confusing when mixed. Like, I'm hurt and let's make art. Jesus Christ. I would like to practice sexual yoga. Do you love me? It doesn't work that way. If you're worried if you're loved, you need therapy. If you are ready to be light, even though everyone hates you, you're ready for yoga. And as usual, I'm speaking in extremes and also in blacks and whites. When we do questions and answers and so forth, I'll try to refine it for you and in our discussion be more subtle and multi-dimensional and so forth, but we have to start with some broad strokes. Now, spiritual practice, the recognition that you are light, has absolutely no conditions for it whatsoever. And if you know of any, tell me. I've never seen anyone become spiritually open as a result of practice, personally. Let me say that as directly as I can. Take any modality of practice, Tibetan Buddhist meditation, Hatha yoga, or I guess we're talking about yoga separately from spiritual practice. So let's just say Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, all of that. How many people do you know that are brilliantly enlightened from doing regular practices? And how many people do you know who have practiced regularly that are kind of just, I don't know, deluded jerks or just average people? And are the people you know the result of the long-time practitioners that you know? Are they more open than your grandmother? I don't know, but most grandmothers I know are more open than most spiritual practitioners I know. Especially as you approach death, really. If you've had a full life and you're relaxed and you open and you have that kind of wisdom. So I don't see any personal direct relationship between any kind of practice and spiritual realization. I know people who know they're light kind of spontaneously. They just went, wow, I'm light. I know people who have discovered their light at the end of 30 years of practice. I know people who don't even know they know their light, but they clearly are living that way compared to people who think they know their light. So I just think that it's important to separate those things, because nothing's going to enlighten you. There are no conditions that can enlighten you. Enlightenment is unconditional. So to be light is not based on any conditions whatsoever. To practice yoga, to allow the flow to move more fully, that's based on conditions of extreme exploration, let's say. Willing to unturn every stone, push things to the edge, do an asana to the edge, dance beyond whatever you dance for, experiment with your voice while singing, done. It's risky, in other words. It's risky. And if you're a good artist, you fall on your face a fucking lot. You go, oops, poof, and you go, huh, okay, let's try that again. But you don't want to do that if you're in a therapy mode. You know, someone's dealing with their issues of deep abuse, and you don't want to go, oops, I just ruined your life. You don't want to violate people's boundaries. You don't want to push people when they're needing the safety of therapy, or yourself. But you must do that when you enter the yogic art domain. If you don't, you're probably still doing therapy and thinking you're doing yoga. Having said that, we can now approach sexuality perhaps with a bit more discrimination. I do therapy with people who need therapy at moments. And I'm certainly open to the mutual recognition of our existence as light. But my basic work with people, at least here, would be in that yogic dimension. So it would be to create situations of extreme exploration so that we can have moments of true revelation and offer that through our whole body as art. Now, in doing that, you will come across your dysfunctions, and you need to do those therapies, and we might do them here. And you may also have moments of flashing and realizing your light, and at that moment, there's no need for any practice. There's nothing. So those moments may happen, but the practice of the art of yoga requires a different kind of environment and motivation. It is not safe. It is risky. It is extreme in moments. If done skillfully, it's extreme with care, of course. I'll stop there for a moment and see if anyone has any questions before I go on any farther. So those of you who are still trying to come to terms like how feminine am I, how masculine am I, that's therapy. I'm personally, just humanly, absolutely uninterested in that. It's very useful for all of us to do. It's like I'm not particularly into golf, but a lot of my friends golf. I have nothing against it. What I really am motivated to do personally, just karmically, is help people manifest art through their life. And one area that has been incredibly complicated for people, especially so-called spiritual practitioners, is the realm of sexuality. So let's frame this in how do we make our sexuality into an art that we offer in everyday life? You understand that difference? I mean, how do I take whatever I am sexually, just who I am as a sexual being at every dimension, and then offer that as art in my intimacy, but perhaps even in everyday life? If that's not your motivation, then whatever I say is not going to work for you or fit for you or apply to you. So, how many people have recognized that they and their partner were light in the midst of a sexual occasion? Raise your hand if you went, wow, I'm light, they're light. You know, not verbally, but okay, good, most of you. Mm-hmm. So those are these moments. I mean, you can't. And how many people during sex felt a kind of, not necessarily just the instantaneous and spontaneous recognition of what is, but also the skillful working out of that light through the bodies? Because you could recognize your light and still have, you could be like Ramana Maharshi or something, you know, who, as far as I know, didn't have sex or hardly had minimal bodily inhabitants or something. So you could recognize light and have no yogic karmas at all, or even therapeutic karmas. So you could recognize light, be totally dysfunctional, which Ramana Maharshi was. I mean, if he was in the United States, he'd be in an institution, as far as I know. I mean, I didn't know him personally, of course, but apparently he just sat there, and before people were feeding him in the basement of the temple, that's pretty dysfunctional. Any of you who were found, like, under a bridge, you would get therapy, you know, or medication. I'm not trying to diss Ramana Maharshi, who I respect greatly. I just want to be clear that he was in an Indian culture that accounted for dysfunction and took care of it so that people who were alive as light but were absolutely dysfunctional could still exist in the culture. So therapy is, we could go into this, I don't want to be too theoretical today, but therapy is defined by the culture, what's dysfunctional in the culture. Ramana Maharshi didn't need therapy in the India he was in. He would here if he wanted to fit in. If he wanted to fit in. He wouldn't want to. But so you could be recognizing that you're light and totally inept. I mean, let's keep it all sexual since you all seem to have it up for that. You could be impotent and frigid and enlightened. I mean, it's kind of speaking the colloquial. You could recognize that you're God and have no capacity to have sex whatsoever. You could recognize you're God and have sex that's totally dysfunctional at the therapeutic level, you know, mommy, 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 or something. You could have sex. You could realize that you're a light and be kind of ratchety sexually. So like you're light, but just kind of like, hi. I mean, or have no relationship to sex at all, recognizing that you're light. So that's really important to understand, that your function, dysfunction, your flow, and your glow are unrelated. You could glow. You could be a human who glows. People come to you and bow because you're light, and be totally dysfunctional, fucked up, need therapy, and have no yogic capacities at all. You could be incredibly yogically adept. Look across the room, people have orgasms, move energy, and need a whole lot of therapy because you can't function whatsoever, and really not know that you're light. And you could be totally functional therapeutically. You could be integrated in culture, happy, healthy, able to communicate interpersonally, not project too much, not do too much transfer and stuff, all the psychological things. You're going to be aware of all that, and have no yoga capacity and not know your light. They're totally separate. You could grow in one and not the others. And this is true at every level, gross, subtle, causal, whatever. So it's really important to understand those differences, because I find that, especially amongst these kind of gatherings, they're confused. And you tend to mix like therapeutic modality with art, the artistic endeavor. Now, is that useful? Certainly. I mean, as a human being, do the therapy you need to do the art you need to do. You will grow as a human being thereby. But think of the greatest art you know. How fucked up are those people? Real fucked up in general. Did their art come from that? Yes. Would you have wanted them to do therapy? For their sake, perhaps, if you were concerned of them growing as a whole being. But in terms of what they offered the world, how much of that came from them taking their pain and others' pain and the incompleteness of existence and the inability to resolve everything and absolute conflict and opposition, and yogically opening that so it comes out as art, through the tone of voice, through the painting, through the way you're making love. So your suffering and your pleasure, it's all expressed as art. I mean, that's where most art comes from, and to do a whole lot of therapy would ruin that in the moment. You could do therapy one day and art the next day, but I mean, you don't go from a thorough assessment of the way your object relations from your childhood affect your current thing and then do art. I mean, that's madness, actually. That's kind of fascism, where everyone's locked up in, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So back to sex. Therapy, yoga, spiritual practice as applied to sex. I've heard Ken and other people refer to the kinds of thing I do as types and stuff. Types, masculine, feminine types. You all know what I'm talking about? I'm assuming you're all fluent in Wilberese, which is the best language I know for this kind of stuff. You know the 4 quadrants? What's before the 4 quadrants? I mean, what do the 4 quadrants describe?
Phenomenon.
That's the feminine. So where I'm coming from is not masculine and feminine as types, although certainly you could use them that way. I'm talking about the nature of this moment right now as you're sitting here. If you can just relax a bit with me together, feeling this, is there stuff happening? And there's the witness of it, if you'd like to use those words. You probably have used those words, right? So without really getting into the nuances of that yet, which are deep and subtle, it's important to feel that you can identify more with what's happening or more with that which is observing what's happening. Well, the 4 quadrants are what's happening. Internal and external happenings, singular and plural. All of that is the feminine. All of that is she. All of that is her dancing. Your mind is dancing as she. The feminine is form, is change, is light itself. The masculine is the aspect of existence. I mean, you have to pull them apart. So let's say that there is conscious light. There is oneness. There's no, anything you say is immediately wrong. But as soon as that splits into 2, that's what I call masculine and feminine, observer and observed. And then what you observe can be described in the 4 quadrants and all of that. Does that make sense? It's not types. Now, you could go off into what you observe and then look at masculine and feminine types. That's useful too. That's not what I do, but that's an interesting way to apply something. So, masculine and feminine in this moment are you more identified with the witness, which has a feeling of kind of backing up. So you can kind of see it in people. I don't know if you could see me. I'm kind of low here. But people who are identified in a masculine moment, they kind of like go, and somehow they think that by the action of identifying with the witness, it's a spiritual practice. It's basically identifying with half the game, or however you want to say it. It's the masculine perversion. It's kind of like